Have you ever felt like a house was watching you? I mean really watching you, the kind of place that breathes. It doesn't happen loudly, just this subtle tightening of the walls, a soft rise in the floorboards, like a chest filling with air. Then comes the exhale, a slow sigh through the vents that makes the lights flicker, as if they're trying to forget something terrible. Aoi Kizuragi noticed it on his very first night. He was standing in the entryway, rain dripping from his coat onto the old tatami mats, a single suitcase by his side. The house was odd tall, narrow, and squeezed between two modern concrete buildings, like a forgotten relic time hadn't quite managed to swallow. The realtor had been almost comically apologetic. Cheap rent, quiet neighborhood, he'd said. Perfect for someone starting over. Starting over. It's a polite way of saying you're running away from something, isn't it? Aoi slipped off his shoes and stepped onto the cool floor. The door slid shut behind him with a soft, deliberate click. It was too careful, too precise to be an accident. And that's when it happened. The house took its first breath. At his new job, Aoi was just a high school art teacher. That's what his papers said, anyway. He arrived early, spoke little, and graded his students' work with meticulous care. They saw him as kind but distant, like a window that lets in the light but never actually opens. He was there, but not really there. During the day, he was a ghost in the classroom. At night, the house returned the favor. It studied him. The walls would creak whenever he paced the narrow rooms. The pipes would knock rhythmically when he tried to find sleep. Sometimes, in the darkness, as he lay with his eyes shut, he could swear the shadows leaned in closer, listening, waiting. The first dream came on the third night. It was vivid, terrifyingly real. He found himself standing in a room with no doors. The floor was soaked with something dark and sticky that clung to his bare feet. Then, a woman's voice whispered his name. It wasn't an accusation, nor was it forgiveness. It was simply a statement of fact, of knowing. He turned, and his reflection stared back from a cracked mirror on the wall. But the person in the mirror was smiling. Aoi woke up gasping for air, his nails digging into the futon, his heart hammering against his ribs. And in the silent darkness, the house slowly exhaled. Just stress, he whispered into the empty room, trying to convince himself. The house didn't bother to argue. Next door lived Mrs. Tachibana, an elderly woman with sharp, knowing eyes, who was always sweeping a pathway that was already perfectly clean. One evening, as Aoi was coming home, she spoke without even looking at him. "You hear it too, don't you?" Aoi froze. "What?" he asked, his voice a little shaky. "The house," she said, her broom finally pausing mid-sweep. "It breathes differently depending on who lives inside." Aoi managed a polite laugh, but it came out too loud, too forced. She finally turned her gaze on him, her eyes sharp as needles. "You remind me of the last one." A chill went down Aoi's spine. "Who was that?" he asked. Mrs. Tachibana's expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. A man who stayed until the house finished remembering him. That night, Aoi's dreams were filled with hands. His own hands, scrubbing frantically at a floor that could not come clean. Memory is a strange thing. It doesn't always come back in a flood. Sometimes it seeps in through the cracks of the everyday. For Aoi, it was the sharp, sterile smell of antiseptic in the school infirmary. It was the sudden, sharp snap of a marker breaking in half. It was the sight of red paint spilling across a canvas during art club, looking far too much like something else. In these moments, he would freeze his heart pounding in his chest as images flashed through his mind too quickly to grasp. A sterile hospital corridor, a locked door, a voice screaming his name not with familiarity, but with pure, unadulterated terror. He found himself compelled to draw again. At first, his sketches were just of the house, its long, narrow halls, its warped, crooked windows. But soon, other things began to appear. Faces started to form in the texture of the walls. Eyes peered out from the grain of the wooden beams. Mouths opened where there should have been only cracks in the plaster. One sketch was particularly disturbing. It showed the house itself, but its frame was wrapped around a human silhouette, the wooden beams twisted into a rib cage. He tore that one up immediately, his hands trembling as he shoved the pieces into the trash can. But long after he walked away, he could hear a faint rustling sound coming from the can, as if the paper was trying to piece itself back together. One afternoon, a student named Emi stayed late after class. She watched him sketch for a while in silence. Then she spoke, her voice startlingly direct. "You draw like someone who hates themselves," she said casually. Aoi flinched as if he'd been struck. "That's an odd observation," Amy didn't seem to notice his discomfort. My brother draws like that, she continued, her eyes on his sketchbook. He hurt someone once. A long time ago. He says drawing is how he decides who he wants to be tomorrow. Aoi looked down at his own hands. They were shaking uncontrollably now. Can people really choose? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Amy just shrugged. Only after they admit what they already chose. That night the house didn't breathe in slowly. It inhaled sharply, a sudden violent gasp of air that seemed to shake the very foundations, and the dream returned. The room with no doors, the sticky floor, the whispering voice. But this time it didn't end when he woke up. This time it continued. He remembered. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of madness or a crime of passion. It was a choice. A locked room. A woman who knew his real name, the name he had tried so hard to bury. He had made a choice, calmly, carefully, like closing a door to keep out the cold forever. Aoi woke up screaming, a raw, primal sound torn from the depths of his soul. And this time, in the suffocating silence that followed, the house did not exhale. It held its breath, waiting. He had to get out. Aoi scrambled to the front door, his hands fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. He ran to the windows, tearing back the curtains, but they didn't show the street outside. They showed impossible things, hallways that looped back into themselves. Rooms that didn't exist, a terrifying landscape of memory layered over reality. The walls began to pulse around him, a slow, steady rhythm that matched the frantic beating of his own heart. A voice whispered through the house, a voice that was chillingly familiar. It was his own. You hid well, it echoed from the walls. But guilt is heavy. It sinks. He collapsed to the floor as the final, crushing weight of the truth settled into his bones. He hadn't moved into this house to escape his past. He had moved in because the house was built around his past. This was her house. The woman he had betrayed, the woman he had silenced. He had sealed her fate within these very walls, and the house had learned how to breathe by listening to her final, desperate moments. Outside, Mrs. Tachibana stood on her clean-swept path, watching the windows of Aoi's house glow with a strange, pulsing light. Some houses don't let go, she murmured to the night air. They wait. Morning came. The light that filtered through the windows was quiet, gray. Aoi sat in the center of the main room, completely still. He was surrounded by his sketches, a gallery of his guilt, his fear, his slow, agonizing remembrance. He finally spoke his real name aloud, the first time it had been uttered in years. I remember, he said, his voice clear and steady in the silent house. And with those two words the house finally exhaled. It was a long, tired, shuddering sigh that seemed to release years of tension from the old wooden frame. The walls stopped moving. The impossible hallways vanished. By sunset, the front door slid open on its own. Aoi stood up, and for the first time in a very long time, he walked towards the light. He felt both lighter and heavier, all at once. In the distance, the faint wail of sirens grew closer. But he didn't run. Behind him, the house stood perfectly still, its windows dark and empty. For the first time since he had arrived, it was no longer breathing. It no longer needed to remember for him. Thanks for watching. If this story stuck with you, don't forget to subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more tailies from the shadows.